Hello everyone and welcome to Tariq. And welcome to Tariq classes for class 12th history. And the chapter for today is Kinship, Caste and Class, Early Society circa 600 BCE to circa 600 CE. In the previous chapter, we told you about the economic and political life that was there during this period of circa 600 BCE to circa 600 CE. In this, we'll be telling you about the societies as such, how the economic and political changes changed the society. Like there was extension of agriculture and how that changed the life for forest dwellers. Then craft production came as an entirely different social unit. Then also the unequal distribution of wealth, it increased differences in societies. So this chapter is about class, caste, divide, how was the social structure formed, how did the society function during this period. Historians use textual traditions to understand societies. What were the rules that were written down for people, the social practices that were written down, who wrote these texts, and they were written for whom. So these are the various aspects that we will study in this particular chapter. The first topic that comes in this chapter is the critical edition of Mahabharata. The thing is that in 1919, a group of scholars, and especially under the leadership of V.S. Sukhthankar, and they wanted to compile the critical edition of Mahabharata. So it was a very ambitious work that was done during that period. People and scholars from all over, they started collecting Sanskrit manuscripts from all over the country. Then they compiled it into a text which was around 13,000, comprised of 13,000 pages, and it took 47 years. The texts that were selected were the verses that were very common in general when they were collecting from various parts of the subcontinent. And while they compiled this text, two things became very important and apparent was that only those verses were selected that were common, and there were certain verses that had regional influence on those texts. There were regional variations as well. But those regional variations that were prevalent, they were written in the footnotes of the main text. When issues of social history were for the first time being explored by historians, they came to realize that these texts were very authoritative, that were written by the Brahmins and in Sanskrit. And they came with a face value. So what they started doing was they started reading texts that were written in different languages like Pali, Prakrit, Tamil. And then they realized though these Sanskrit texts written by Brahmins were very authoritative, they were not always were not always accepted by people, they were also rejected. Second topic is kinship and marriage, many rules and varied practices. Not every family is same, right? हर family एक दूसरे एक जैसे नहीं होंगे. There were variations. What they ate, how they performed their duties, what work they did. People belonging to same family, they shared their food, they shared their produce, they worked together, and they were a part of a larger organization, larger ties. They were known as relatives or kinship ties. While family ties are based on blood, but they are defined in various different ways. For example, in certain customs, in certain societies, cousins are regarded as blood, but in many different societies they are not. It's very easy for historians to understand how the family or the society of the elite function, but it is very difficult to know how the ordinary people, how were the familial ties of the ordinary people, how they function. We know that the families function on the basis of kinfolk ties, and smaller the families are the smaller groups, then they are attached to a larger organization known as kinfolk. And every kinfolk, every family society worked differently. That was the basis. And it was easier for the historians to know about people who had influence, the people who were elite families, people who were kings, who were nobles, not the ordinary people. And how the ordinary people function in these families is somewhat historians always wanted to know, or what they thought of kinfolk ties or kinship ties. Now, these families of the elite or the ordinary people, they functioned on the basis of patrilineal. When we look at Mahabharata as well, you will see that there were two group of cousins, Pandavas and Kauravas, who belonged to a single lineage, the Kuru clan, and they were one of the Janapad, and they dominated that area. And there is a feud between both the cousins, and which ends up into a huge battle. And one of them is victorious, that is the Pandavas, and they claim the throne. So, in this Mahabharata also, you get to know that the aspect of patrilineal or patrilineal is given a lot of value, a lot of importance, where the son would claim the throne and he would be the next heir, he would sit on the throne. Patrilineal is where you kind of trace your lineage, your descent from your father's side. And then you have a term called matrilineal, where you claim your descent or you trace them, your lineage, from your mother's side. So a lot of importance was given to patrilineal during this time, and not only this time, even before Mahabharata took place. From circa 600 BCE, we see a lot of importance given to this particular aspect. But there were instances where this was not exactly followed, because if there is no son, if the ruler did not have a son, the brother would claim the throne, or a kinsman would claim it, or if situation was slightly different, women could also claim it, like Prabhavati Gupta had claimed and exercised power. So, though things were rigid, patrilineal was exercised, was followed, but during such situations, exceptions were made. And as we've told you, patrilineal was not only related to the ruling family, it's not exceptional just for the ruling family. Even people, wealthy people or wealthy Brahmins, they too followed this particular concept. While sons were important for the continuity of their lineage, daughters were viewed very differently. Daughters had no claim over the property or the resources of a father. In fact, they were supposed to get married outside their kin, and they would follow the process of exogamy, where they would marry outside the kin at the right time to the right person. And this gave rise to the concept of Kanyadan, which was the father's rightful duty to give away his daughter as a gift to his son-in-law. Then exogamy was one of the practices. Then we also had enogamy, where people were married within their kin group. Then you had polygyny, where man could have more than one wife, and polyandry, where a woman could have more than one husband. जब towns increase होते गए, social complexities आते गए. People, they met and they bought and they sold their products. They met from different places in this urban milieu. And what happened was that this kind of scared the Brahmins, because the customs and the that were laid down by the Brahmins were somewhat questioned, because people of different people belong to different diverse groups when they met. So to curb that, the Brahmins thought of writing down rules of social behavior, especially from circa 500 BCE, and these were known as Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, where the Brahmins were supposed to follow it in a proper manner, followed by people of different people of different castes. They were also supposed to follow it. From 200, one of such works called the Manusmriti was also compiled between 200 BCE to 200 CE. The Brahmin authors of these texts claimed that these texts had universal validity and everybody should follow it. The social But the social complexities and relations, they give us a different view about it. Because people belong to different regions and diversities, it was difficult for everybody to follow it. It was difficult for everybody to abide by it. Also, in these texts, Dharma Sutras and Shastras, we get to know the 8 forms of marriages, where the first 4 are considered good and the remaining are condemned. So there's a possibility that who did not accept the Brahmanical notions or the practices, they were the ones who followed the last 4 forms of marriage. One Brahmanical practice that was evident from 1000 BCE is to classify people in terms of Gotra, and Brahmins followed it judiciously, where कि आपका जो Gotra है, that is named after a Vedic seer, and everybody kinds of follow it, and people belong to the same Gotra have only one descendant, that is that particular Vedic seer. The rules that come in this whole system of Gotra is that whenever a girl marries somebody, she has to leave her father's Gotra and adopt her husband's Gotra, and people of the same Gotra are not supposed to marry. So historians, to understand this, they thought कि अगर is it actually followed by people of that time? So historians started to look at certain people, men or women, whose names were derived from such gotras. And सबसे important example है जो कि है Satavahana rulers को हम जब देखते हैं, they ruled from circa 2nd century BCE to circa 2nd century CE. They ruled western parts of India and Deccan. So when we look at the names of the Satavahana rulers and their wives, we get to know that polygynous. They were polygynous. They had more than one wife. The women mostly belonged to Gautam or the Vashist clans, Gotra, and a lot of them did not leave their father's Gotra or adopted the husband's Gotra. They continued with the father's Gotra. That means this was at times not followed judiciously or strictly as it was laid down by the Brahmins. Another important thing that we get to know when we look at the names of the Satavahana rulers and their wives is that women, a lot of them belonged to the same Gotra. So that means exogamy was not followed, endogamy was followed when it comes to Satavahana rulers. But and that means they were marrying in the same Gotra again, which is against the norms set by the Brahmins. So through this we get to know that even now in the societies of southern India, they still follow it, where marriages are taking place between cousins and there's a close knit that is being formed. So endogamy in various clans are still performed, as opposed to exogamy that was laid down by the Brahmins. When we look at the name of the Satavahana rulers, when we look at the whole system of Satavahana rulers, we get to know that a lot of the rulers, they derived their names from their mother, but that doesn't mean that they were following matrilineally. The claim to the throne was all on the basis of matrilineally, where the son would claim his father's throne or he would be the next heir. The third topic is social differences within and beyond the framework of caste. So the Brahmins formed the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, in which they claim that they would rank first, they are of the divine origin. The rules laid down are of divine origin. The people who were Shudras were supposed to serve everyone, and occupation and the rights were all based on birth. So when we look at the whole system, Dharma Sutras and Shastras, they have classified people on the basis of the 4 varna. The first is the first varna, we'll see the Brahmins. The Brahmins were on the topmost rank. They performed sacrifices. They got sacrifices performed. They were supposed to be given gifts. They were supposed to receive gifts, and they studied the Vedas. The next, second in the Varna, we'll see the Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas are supposed to indulge in warfare, protect the people, get sacrifices performed, give gifts to Brahmins, and make it sure that the system of Varun is being followed in this kingdom. In the third category, we see Vaishyas who are supposed to perform pastoralist activities, trading activities, or agricultural activities. जो चौथे उसमें है चौथा आप देखते हैं वो है Shudras, where the Shudra is the lowest community that is supposed to serve the first three communities. The Brahmins wanted people to follow the system properly. For that, they claimed that this whole system of Varn is of a divine origin and has to be followed by everybody. They made it sure that the Kshatriyas should follow the whole system of Varn and make it happen under his kingdom. And the Brahmins made it sure that the occupation or your position in the Varn is all on the basis of birth. But the system of Varn was not always followed properly, because in the chapter we'll see that the non-Kshatriyas there were a group of people who were non-Kshatriyas and they too were ruling. So necessary नहीं है कि वर्णा सिस्टम है तो सारे ही फॉलो करेंगे, एक्सेप्शन भी हम देखेंगे इस चैप्टर के अंदर. As we've told you, there were exceptions where you will find that not only the Kshatriyas ruled. There have been instances where the non-Kshatriyas have also ruled. For example, the Mauryas, the lineage of Mauryas have always been debated. The Buddhist texts, they claim that they were Kshatriyas. Brahmanical texts claim that they were of low origin. Maurya's immediate successors, जो थे Shungs and the Kanvas, they were Brahmins. So anybody could claim political power if they could gather support, distribute resources. They don't have to necessarily be of Kshatriya lineage. So we see exceptions being made. Other rulers such as Shakas who came from Central Asia, they were known as Mlechas by the Brahmins. And उनमें से सबसे important ruler थे Rudradaman, who supposedly constructed the Sudarshan Lake, and he's been part of the Shaka lineage. That means, and if he's constructing the Sudarshan Lake for his people, that means he was somewhere or the other. He knew Sanskritic practices or traditions of that time. So people who were claimed as Mlech by the Brahmins, people who did not belong to the Kshatriya lineage, who could be Brahmins, who could be of low origin, they could also rule. It's just that if that particular clan could muster support or resources, they could have their claim to political power. Another such very important example is that of the Satvana ruler, Gautamiputra Sri Satkani. He claimed to be a Brahmin and as well as a destroyer of the pride of Kshatriyas. They claimed that they made it sure that intermarriages would not take place within the four Varnas, though they got into the marriage alliance with one of the kin groups of Rudradaman, who were considered as Mlech by the Brahmins. They also followed endogamy as opposed to exogamy that was laid down by the Brahmins, and they also belonged to the Brahminical ideology. They also were Brahmins. So that means exceptions were made. Everything was very complex. Though the rules were laid down by the Brahmins, Dharma Sutras and Shastras were written, but हम ये देखते हैं कि काफ़ी complexities भी होती हैं, काफ़ी exceptional cases भी होते हैं. And सबसे बड़ा उसका example है how the Satvana rulers function, how their society functioned and what rules they followed. These complexities can be seen when another term is used called Jati. So Jati is also a term used by the Brahmins based on birth. Whenever Brahmins, they encountered people of a different occupation that they could not club it in the system of Varna, they got them under the social category called the Jati. So where one is there are 4 varnas. Jatis are more than 4, 5, 6. They are in larger numbers. So people sometimes, for example, people living in the forest called Nishad, they were clubbed in the system of Jati. Or if ever Brahmins encountered people who were goldsmith or swarnkara, they were also clubbed into a particular Jati. The thing is that जब भी वर्ना सिस्टम के अंदर नहीं इनको डाल सकते थे तो वो जाति सिस्टम के अंदर चला जाता था, और जाति 4 से ज़्यादा हैं, मतलब various jatis. And jati which shared a common occupation, they were organized into guilds or shrenis. Historians have come across documents that tell about these people, and one such example is an inscription in Mandsaur, which is in Madhya Pradesh, and where it tells about a guild or a guild of silk weavers who came from Gujarat and settled down in Mandsaur because they preferred settling down under the ruler who was ruling at that point of time. And this particular stone inscription, it also tells about the complexities, social complexities that were there at that point of time, where people though shared their occupation, but people of belonging to different occupation could also opt for other occupation. Or like, if a person is a goldsmith, he could have opted be a blacksmith, or vice versa. So you see social complexities. At times these guild groups, they come together, they will construct a temple, they would construct a sarovar. So these were the complexities that we find when we read about this particular stone inscription of Mandsaur. When we look beyond the 4 varans, we also find people who did not follow the Brahminical or Sanskritic practices. They often were looked down upon, they were seen as odd people by the Brahmins. They could be the pastoralists, or they could be forest dwellers, especially Nishads, this was the clan that had Eklavya, who was an important character in the Mahabharata, and they were often looked down upon. Even nomadic pastoralists, because they could not be clubbed under the settled agriculturists, so they were also frowned upon. People not speaking Sanskrit, Malechas, they were also frowned upon by the Brahmins. And some of these examples we do find even in the Mahabharata text, if you read them, where people who did not follow the Brahminical ideologies or Sanskritic practices, how they were looked down, or how they were perceived by the Brahmins who had written these norms. While Brahmins considered some people to be outside the social category, they sharpened the divide by considering certain people as untouchables. Brahmins or people, they were people who performed activities that were considered pure, and if by chance they come in contact with people who are untouchable, it was considered polluting at that point of time. They were not supposed to take food from such untouchables or people who were considered untouchables. And there were certain activities like disposing of the dead or disposing of dead animals or people that was considered really impure. And people who performed such activities were considered to be known as, they were called as Chandals. And coming in close contact with such people or even looking at them was considered polluting at that point of time. Manusmriti also jotted down a few rules for Chandals. So the rules were that they were supposed to live outside the villages, they were supposed to use discarded utensils, discarded clothes of the dead, wear iron jewelry. They were supposed to dispose dead bodies of people who had no relatives. They were considered really lowly, as in even looking at them was considered dirty, polluting. One of the Chinese travelers who had come in that time, called Faxian, he says that at times, whenever the Chandals would move out of their homes, especially at night, they would sound a clapper so that people would avoid seeing them. Another Chinese pilgrim known as Xuanzang, even he claimed that such executioners or such scavengers they were supposed to live outside the towns or the villages so that there's completely no contact with them. Beyond birth, resources and status. Let us examine one of the episodes that took place in Mahabharata, where Duryodhan, who was on the Kaurav side, he invited Pandavas and especially the oldest Pandav, Yudhishthira, for a game of dice. And there's a lot, the Pandavas are deceived in the entire game. So Yudhishthira, when he's playing the game of dice, he puts his property, his treasury, his gold, his army, his elephants, his palace, his brothers, and his himself and his wife at stake, and he loses all of them. So when we look at this episode, such episodes are also mentioned in the Dharma Sutras and Shastras, especially when it comes to issues of ownership. The property or resources of the father were supposed to be distributed amongst the brothers, and a special share for the elder brother. Women had no claim or share when it comes to property. The only share of property that she claims is that called Stridhan, which she gets from her parents, especially at the time of marriage. Her children can have claim over it without her husband's intervention. But Manusmriti warns women when it comes to hoarding property, hoarding money, valuables, even Stridhan, without husband's permission. But we see certain exceptions when it comes to Prabhavati Gupta and wealthy women who had claimed over valuables, over property, over livestock, but money was the claim over money was mostly by men. So the social distinction between a man and a woman increased when it comes to the increased disparity or distribution of distribution of resources between man and woman. According to Brahmanical texts, another criteria for regulating wealth was Varna. So, as we all know, the Shudras were supposed to be on below the first three Varnas, and they were supposed to serve the rest three Varnas. And if actually this was implemented the way it was written down by the Brahmins and the Kshatriya would have been the wealthiest. Though considering that situations were there where Kshatriyas were shown to be exercising power and they were wealthy, Brahmins were also wealthy, but exceptional cases have also been there where the Brahmins have been depicted poor Brahmins have also been depicted. At another level, even Brahmanical view was codified by the Dharma Sutras and Shastras. Other traditions were writing critique of the whole Varna system, and one such important example is when we look at the early Buddhist texts, especially critiquing the Varna system. According to them, the Varna system was not natural. It was not of divine origin, it was man-made, it was inflexible, and claiming status on the basis of birth, something that was not acceptable under the Buddhist texts. We have been examining situations where people claimed wealth or were given a status, but there were other possibilities as well. People who were generous were celebrated, whereas people who were hoarders, they hoarded wealth, were despised as well. Explaining social differences, a social contract. So Buddhists also started to study the social inequalities and the formation of institutions to regulate social conflict. So according to them, there's a text called Sutpitaka which mentions that humans did not have fully evolved bodily forms, neither did plants have fully evolved, the plants were fully evolved. Everything existed in a very idyllic state, and whenever any being needed something to eat, they got it from the plants or they got it from the environment and they consumed it. But over a period of time, deterioration took place. Humans became vindictive, they became deceitful, they became greedy. So when this situation arose at that point of time, they thought that there should be somebody who could be wrathful when such situation took place, who could censor whenever it was supposed to be censored, or who would look at the law and order, or who would punish those who were supposed to be punished. And in return, he would be given a bag full of rice, and this person came to be known as Mahasamant, or the Great Elect. This shows the rise of the kingship, where whenever the king is elected, he's given taxes in the form of the services he's rendered. So whenever this situation would arise, somebody would elect somebody to look after the people, and he would be given taxes in return, or he would be given various other resources in return for the services he's rendered. This whole system, when we see it, actually you see that the humans were kind of institutionalizing the economic and social relations. You would also see that these institutions were all man-made. So if these were all man-made, that means that these can be changed in the future. It's not that rigid, or it should not be that inflexible. So the Buddhists, they also tried to criticize various things that were written by the Brahmins, or they started to read up the whole social differences. They too had their own critique. Handling text, historians and the Mahabharata. So whenever historians, they wanted to analyze a particular text, they would always see various elements of that particular text. The language that has been used, whether it is Prakrit, Pali or Tamil, if these languages were used, that means ordinary people were reading it. Whether the text was written in Sanskrit, that means it was meant for the elite or the priests to read. The kinds of text, whether they were mantras for ritualistic purposes, whether they were stories for the people to read or to retell them to other people. The authors, what was the perspective of the author, the idea that the author was putting in the text, the kind of audience that was there, who was ready to read such text, or it was how the author was making it so interesting for the audience to read, for the audiences that were ready to read such texts. Also, the time frame in which it was written, the place in which it was written, also the portrayal of a particular community or a portrayal of a particular place that was in the text. So a lot of things were considered, is considered whenever historians or scholars are analyzing a particular text. And when it comes to Mahabharata, it is a very difficult task because it's a very complex text. When we look at the language of the text Mahabharata, we're looking at the Sanskrit one, though it was written in several languages. But the Sanskrit that is used here is much simpler as compared to the Vedas or the Prashastis. Historians have kind of divided the whole text into two broad sections. One is the narrative, which contains the stories, and deductive, which contains the social norms and instructions. But these two broad distinctions are not very rigid. At times, you would see narratives having the social norms and the deductive having the stories as well. And historians, they agree that Mahabharata was a dramatic text, a dramatic story, where the deductive element could have been added later on. The social norms or social instructions could have been added on later for the people to read and understand. Mahabharata is also considered to be an itihas. Itihas means history. So was it a real war? It's very debatable because a lot of people think that it could be a war between two clans, within the kinfolk, and could have been preserved by people, and then being retelling of this story would have taken of this particular story would have taken place. Uh, Also, no such evidence of that huge war have been found out. So it is very debatable whether it actually took place or not, and that too at a large scale, as it is shown and portrayed in television or in movies. Who authored Mahabharata? When we look at the whole scenario, we see that originally Mahabharata was kind of composed by a charioteer bard, which came to be known as Sut. And these charioteers, they accompanied their Kshatriya master kings to wars, and they started singing in their praise whenever they won any war, and these were kind of circulated orally. From circa 5th century BC, we find that the Brahmins taking over it and started writing the text. This was also a time when we find the Mahajanapads forming, when we see Kuru, Panchal, Janapads forming as a proper state, and also the story of Mahabharata being revolved around Kuru and Panchal. We also find that the upheavals that accompanied whenever states were formed, older traditions were kind of removed, and by the newer traditions, these stories were also added in the Mahabharata. We also find redactive being added to Mahabharata, and these were somewhat, they look like Manusmriti. From the 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE, we find these changes being made in the text. Circa 200 BCE to circa 200 CE, we also find the growth of Vishnu as a god, a cult that was taking place during this period, and we find that Krishna was one of the most important character of the epic. He being recognized as Vishnu. The text kept on increasing with time. जहाँ ये सिर्फ 10,000 verses का था, it came up to be of 1 lakh verses. Traditionally, sage Vyas has been attributed to this whole text, that he has authored it. But this somewhat is kind of the evolution of Mahabharata, where from a charioteer oral bard to Brahmins writing it, then certain changes being made in 200 BCE to 200 CE. Also, we find when the Janapads were forming, how the story revolved around two major Janapads, Kuru and Panchal. So it's a whole evolution, and it kept on increasing with time. Mahabharata, like any other major epic, it talks about war, battles, with a description of forests and palaces being given. In 1951 to 52, B.B. Lal, he was an archaeologist, he tried to excavate the village of Hastinapur in UP, in Uttar Pradesh. And this to find evidence of Hastinapur, which is mentioned in the text Mahabharata. The site where B.B. Lal excavated was on the upper Ganga Doab region, and इधर ये कुरु, जो कि एक महाजनपद था, वो भी यही situated था. Could it be a coincidence that it is the same Hastinapur? It's very debatable. When he was excavating, he found 5 occupational levels, and in that the second and third are of great interest, where you find the mud bricks and the burnt bricks, ringed wells. There could have been a possibility when the text Mahabharata was written, after the narrative section was written, the places or the cities would have been added on later after 6th century BCE, when towns and urban planning was happening, and towns were emerging and flourishing, urban centers were emerging. Looking at that, they added these cities and added the urban cities in the text. We really don't know. Another aspect that is very striking in the text is the practice of polyandry, where we see Draupadi married to 5 Pandav brothers. Present historians suggest that if polyandry has been portrayed in the text, there's a possibility that at some point of time the ruling elites could have practiced it, or there could have been shortage of women because of war situation at that point of time. That is why this was practiced, and gradually it must have been disfavored by the Brahmins later on. but this has been a central aspect of Mahabharata. Another thing is that at times when such narratives have been written, so do you see the creative side of it? It's not necessary that social realities are portrayed in such narratives. It could be a thought, an author's choice to show a certain character this way. So it's all very debatable. ज़रूरी नहीं है कि असली रियलिटी सोशल रियलिटी में यही पॉलीएंड्री ही चल रहा हो सकता है वो एक ऑथर की मर्जी हो कि ही वांटेड टू शो पर्टिकुलर कैरेक्टर्स इन अ पर्टिकुलर वे. इट्स हिज ओन चॉइस. Mahabharata is a very dynamic text when we look at it because it was just not written in Sanskrit. Later on, it was written in various languages. It had various additions to it. Regional additions have also taken place. Regional influences have also taken place. Not only in the subcontinent but also in the Southeast Asian countries, you find them rewriting Mahabharata and with their own regional aspects being added to it, their own regional practices being added to it, local traditions being added to it. Though the central story is similar, but you would also find additions of various other aspects according to their local traditions or their regional tales or regional traditions. So it is actually a very dynamic text. At times we find that Draupadi was only married to Yudhishthir and not the other four Pandavas in certain Mahabharata texts. So there is a very interesting way of retelling Mahabharata by various traditions, by various communities. So in this chapter, what we've seen is that Brahmins were the ones who wrote the Manusmriti, the Dharma Sutras and the Dharma Shastras. They laid down the one system, they laid down the rules and regulations that are supposed to be followed by the people, but in reality it was followed, but we also see exceptions too, like the Shuns, who were Brahmins who ruled, how the Mauryas who ruled, and their social background is very debatable, whether they were Kshatriyas, whether they were lower origin. Then we also find Satavahanas ruling, who were of Brahmanical origin. Then how the Brahmins laid down the rule of Gotra, where people could not marry within their own Gotra, and the women were supposed to leave their father's Gotra and adopt their husbands. But at certain situations, you find them not renouncing their father's Gotra or adopting their husband's Gotra. So there are various complexities. Certain things, though when we read text, they seem rigid, but at times you also see that people were not following it. Then Varn system, and how certain people who could not be fitted in the Varn system, they were clubbed in jatis, social organization. And then we look at Mahabharata, how dynamic this text was, how to analyze the text, whether it was a narrative, whether it was didactic, when was a didactic or the social norms were added to the text, and how was the society formed in the whole Mahabharata. Two central places shown in the Mahabharata, Kuru and Panchal, they started to exist in the 5th century BCE, how they were also added in the text. So this chapter talks about the complexities of social inequality, of society, of how the societies work, and how the Brahmins made sure it worked, and at times how the other communities or other traditions like the Buddhist tradition, they critique this whole scenario of Brahmanical institution. This is what the chapter is all about. We would request you to go through the chapter yourself, because even after watching the video, you should go through the chapter if we've missed out on certain point or certain aspect of it, and also go through the boxes that are there, the purple boxes. They're very important. I hope that you've liked today's episode. Please like, share and subscribe, and keep watching Tariq.